So, who do you think is the largest farmland holder in the United States?
I'd say Old McDonald.
You'd be surprised that it is a computer mogul name of Bill Gates, who has now bought so much land in the past few months through his different holding companies that he now owns 242,000 acres across the United States in farm holdings, which is absolutely incredible. In his home
Mhm.
state of Washington, he owns over 16,000 acres. In Arkansas, he owns nearly 48,000 acres. In Louisiana, a whopping 70,000 acres of farmland. And that's only going to increase as we start to see what is um, the continued fallout from this coronavirus, disaster, economic disaster. People like Bill Gates, people who have a lot of money, are going to be cashing in as folks get more and more desperate to sell their assets. It's pretty frightening when you realize how many small farmers in this country have been completely bought out over the past few decades. Um, so like large and very large farms produce around like 63% of agricultural products in the United States. But there still are a significant amount of small family farms, around like 2 million. Um, but much of that farmland over the next 2 decades is very likely to change and people change hands as the farming population continues to age, right? And that's a real crisis in farming, is that most of these small family farms really are run by older folks, and there isn't really like this young generation of farmers coming into that. So what you're seeing now is these massive corporate buyouts of small farms. Um, in particular, somebody like Bill Gates, who's not just buying farms for investment opportunity. He's buying farms because he wants to control agriculture in the United States. And I'm not going to go on some wild Alex Jones conspiracy theory about how he's trying to poison people with hormones or anything like that. But what I am going to ask people is, do you want to live in a country where the means by which we produce the food that we eat is held not just by a few rich people, but in particular by one gentleman with a long history, by the way, of just buying out entire industries so that he can pursue his own, ideas, regardless of whether or not they are, proven.
Yeah, I mean that I think that understates it. He's an intellectual property pirate. Like
Yeah.
Microsoft was hit with a consent decree by the DOJ saying, "Hey, stop doing monopoly stuff," and they didn't. But that was they at
Mm-hmm.
least got the attention of regulators in the '90s for antitrust. And they would do things like. And I was listening to a Grubstakers episode on this
Nice.
before, and famously, Microsoft would have these like merger discussions, but that would just be cover for industrial espionage. So
Mm-hmm.
like he's the complete piracy. Like that
Mm-hmm.
that's what Microsoft is. Piracy with good lawyers to like sort it out who owns what afterwards. And now he gets to decide cuz look, I mean, my mom grew up on a dairy farm,
Mm-hmm.
dairy and soybeans near Wapton, North Dakota. And the exact same things happening, right? Like the um, they're not going to be able to pass the farm down to a next generation. So ultimately, probably going to get bought up by someone like this, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what's happening on every farm around there, and it is horrible. And that this guy with these profits that were again not it's not like he was doing the coding. Like Bill Gates is like the idea that this figure would get to determine agriculture in the
Yeah.
United States of America because he got lucky in the 90s and like got on the right team is
Mm-hmm.
it's revolting. I mean, it's one of the most disgusting things about capitalism. I mean, and not to mention, the ways he gets to play like the playground that the Gates Foundation has turned other countries around the world into. Let's just assume and hope for the best that he's going to use this power that he's amassed for good. I
Well, it's like,
guess.
even if his intentions are good, like let's just put that, like, just as a thought experiment, a
Hmm.
Sam Harris style, right? Like, even if his intentions are good, the possibility of just utmost disaster from Bill Gates is huge, because as I was saying earlier, and you can look at this with his philanthropy, where he basically, because he has such a large purse, becomes the sole director of a lot of nonprofits around the United States, around the globe, and gets to essentially dictate, depending on whatever most recent thing that he read in Reader's Digest or whatever the hell he reads, whatever a news article excited him the most as like the new innovative strategy. That's his whole thing. It's like putting in new innovative strategies like micro lending, for example, which has been a complete disaster around the globe for small farmers, just introducing them to the finance system so that they can just be perpetually indebted to financial institutions, right? Like that's something that somebody like Bill Gates likes to push, right? Which has been a disaster for people. Put him in charge of our food system, and we'll be facing the same kind of potential for just serious, serious mismanagement of the land. The second point that I want to make, which I think is much more important, honestly, is just the question of democracy, as Matt was hitting on too. It's like that's the thing that's disgusting about capitalism. This guy did computer work, right? And now he gets to decide agriculture policy in the United States. Like it's a complete joke. This is not like a rational distribution of resources or power in the society. And like so, like the inequality aspects of capitalism, yes. All of these other aspects of criticism of capitalism are 100% valid. But this is also something that I think often gets overlooked. That it's insane that somebody, because they just have access to such immense amounts of large amounts of money, now get to dictate a policy and just have actual material power, not just wealth, not that he never has to worry about money again, or he can buy whatever he wants, blah, blah. No, this guy actually not has influence over your life. He has influence over these huge communities. I mean, we're talking about in Arkansas and Louisiana, the guy has over 50,000 acres in Arkansas. Like that's not a small landowner. That's somebody who has incredible influence on that entire state. Meanwhile, he's from Washington, right? This guy has no connection to these people. It's a joke. It's not democratic.
Well, is it Cascade Investments?
It's Cascade Investments is his sleeper company that does all this kind of stuff. And of course, by the way, this story, which has been in all of the major kind of landholding and farmer publications for the past few days, the actual the facts of the story are just that he bought all this land, because they're still refusing to say what they want to do with it. Right. The thing is, it's not even like Bill Gates came out and said, like, I'm buying a bunch of land and we're going to, do green agriculture, something like that. Everyone's just assuming because he wrote a blog post about, family farmers raising more chickens, right, that he's going to, go back to some kind of old school version of agriculture. Right. He just got his Cascade, was it Cascade Holdings or Cascade Investments, to buy up, significant portions of land. Yeah. Right. And he has all these different acres, and all the land holdings that he has are owned by different companies. They're not all owned by Cascade. Anyways, the point is that this is just another great example of the direct threat that capitalism has to any semblance of an idea of democracy or community even.
Right. Yeah. Because I mean, somebody in the chat points out that the ideal of family farm can be romanticized, but the fact is that it is a decentralization of power. And I think you can make the points, which I have time for, which is like they're an insulation against the natives taking back the land. Obviously, all that stuff is true. But this is like capitalism in action, right? Like some guy, I mean, it is unbelievable. But yeah, Bill Gates, I mean, it's the very first rabbit hole I ever went down on the internet was a conspiracy theory about that the global elite were building a giant ark in the Rockies because they're expecting a flood. And it wasn't, first of all, climate change wasn't wasn't operative. This was like the 90s, and whoever wrote this conspiracy wasn't the climate change, wasn't concerned about it. But I printed it out and showed it to my teacher, and she looked at me like I'm crazy. But I just want to say, Bill, what are you doing with all that farmland? Because another point we should just say is that farmland is distinct from, say, timber or ranch land, right? And like I've personally come across, Ted Turner owns like Montana basically, and like the Badlands, and right, like that. This is about agriculture. This isn't just about he wants to have plays. He's going for a play on this sector, and it is just disgusting. Because what's this guy really offered? What's the great fucking innovation
And we should do something more in depth on Bill Gates
Yeah.
sometime in the future. But it's just like, it's disgusting, and it's amazing how much his like PR um, campaign essentially at this point has done for his image, that people don't find
Yeah, I mean,
somebody like this, buying up all the land and all the agriculture land in the country
yeah.
as something suspicious, right? Because it's like, oh, it's nice, Bill Gates, but if
He partners with Netflix and Vox. He's going to keep us up to date on what he's
exactly,
doing.
or with their positive stories. I mean, honestly, Bill Gates is like one of like the biggest. He is the architect of like one of the biggest psyops for capitalism, which is like this fixation. I can't remember the name of his organization right now, but basically just pays journalists like obscene amounts of money to print like uplifting news stories, right? To basically try to convince people that like this system is really working for a lot of folks, when all you have to do is look out your window to see that it really is not.
Yeah, Steve Pinker's grift, for
And
instance.
I think though we should juxtapose that with another corporation that people do rightfully understand is very worrying, which is Walmart, who has the Walton Family Foundation, which is a foundation meant to spend the billions of dollars that the Walton family inherited from their father, for their just insanely large corporation, has been spending insane amounts of money in the Colorado River Basin. Do we have that story handy?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Give me 1 second.
yeah, no worries. But the Walton Family Foundation has been pouring millions of dollars into nonprofit groups that are concerned with the Colorado River, which you absolutely should be. But they have been pushing basically demand management programs in the area, which pay farmers to not irrigate their lands, right, all across the basin. Which is, yeah, here we go. Yeah, so the Walmart Family Foundation has been pouring millions of dollars into water focused nonprofits, around $25 million a year to nonprofits concerned about the Colorado River. It's clear the foundation cares deeply about the river in this time of excruciating drought, and some of its money goes to river restoration or more efficient irrigation. Yet its main interest is promoting demand management. The water marketing scheme seeks to add 500,000 acre feet of water to declining Lake Powell by paying rural farmers to temporarily stop irrigating. Essentially, and the reason that people are critical about this is that what that essentially does is it commodifies water by putting a price on water for folks who are choosing to irrigate their lands instead of receiving that kind of payment, right? It's a kind of early stage of commodification of an actual existing resource. And we're not sitting here necessarily criticizing the idea of doing water demand management in the area. I'm not an expert on the Colorado River Basin. I'm not saying anything like that. The issue here, and what this in these Times piece, what I should also mention is written by Dave Martian, points out, is that none of the journalists or the local publications around us who would normally, sniff into this story are looking into it. And that's because Walmart has been giving everybody grants. And all of these boards, even though, Walmart is not controlling these nonprofits, because everyone is recognizing that this is where the pipes are flowing or where the money is coming from, are going to be much less likely to blow the whistle on any kind of activities from Walmart. It should also be mentioned that Walmart had pay in the area that I lived in, South Carolina, a huge settlement from a lawsuit because they were polluting, I believe it was the Santee River in South Carolina, with just really horrendous mismanagement by putting fertilizer out by drainage ditches, which was then going into the river and polluting it. Anyways, Walmart is a massive polluter, and also the Walton family is not a group of people who we want to be trying to, again, make these kind of decisions for communities.
Right.
And also, it's just something that is a very reasonable thing to wonder why the Walton family right now is so fixated on the Colorado River Basin, and the fact that they have now basically bought out the local watchdogs and bought out the local journalists should be raising alarm bells in everybody's head.
Yeah, I mean that's the dystopian element of this is all the local news and local like watchdog organizations. We're at a point in media where it is all hollowing out, right? Newsrooms have been hollowing out for decades, and the only jobs in media that are rising are like copywriters for public relations, and so like the one area that gets, and like ProPublica for instance does a lot of great work, but philanthropy is a very corrupt model, and it's not to be trusted. And for this reason, because you have these I mean, like we talked about with Bill Gates, but I mean, the Walton family they're not your friend. And even if they were your friend, like, why should they get to, like, your friends don't get to decide the Colorado River is a commodity now, right? That's not how friends act. If you're going to commodify the Colorado River, you're going to take a democratic decision somehow. And yeah, like they just come in and, I mean, this is how, we talked a little bit previously about how hollowed out local news is, particularly. But I mean, this makes the case that also Politico, I mean, there's a lot of money sloshing around Politico. And then even the New York Times, who ostensibly should be above these sorts of things, obviously not, because they're not, they talk about, water issues, as the In These Times piece points out, without mentioning what the Waltons are doing on the Colorado River for 41 million people.
And I think so too. And I'm just going to go back to this piece really quick to make a couple quick points. Is that one, people are raising the alarm bells that, since the Walton family is essentially buying all these organizations, it means that no one is really going to challenge the strategies that are put forward by Walmart, right? So that's one kind of, nice criticism that like, oh, maybe they're wrong, just like what we were saying about Bill Gates. But I'll read this right now. You don't have to put it up. I can just read it. This is something that is exceptionally worrying that from this In These Times piece that says, in May 2020, the two nonprofits where the Walton family had put a lot of money into, the two nonprofits collaborated in a story exploring the investment group Water Asset Management, speculating that it sought to buy and dry agricultural water, leaving behind barren dust bowls. What was not reported that only municipalities can buy and dry under Colorado's already tough water anti-speculation laws. The big omission was that a Walton family-funded nonprofit, the Nature Conservancy, had an ongoing demand management study exactly where and when the Water Asset Management Group was buying land. And that's the kind of
so cloaking themselves, just to spell it out, they're cloaking themselves in concern about environmental issues to advantage themselves.
Exactly. And it's just one of those things where it's like, well, I mean, the bigger point is that the local organizations are basically being bought out that people aren't investigating. So from the nonprofits to the local publications. This is again from the piece. Colorado College journalism instructor Corey Hutchins said he was surprised to hear the size of some of the funding, with KUNC and Aspen Journalism each receiving $100,000 apiece for several years. That sounds like a big Colorado water story in itself. You might also worry about self-censorship. Anyways, this is just the way that big capital is moving through philanthropy in the Waltons case, and then also in Bill Gates' case, just like through outright buying, to play major roles in the environmental aspects of our society, and then in Bill Gates' case in particular, the agricultural aspects of our society. Completely, in Walmart's case, clandestine, because if you're owning the newspapers and you're owning the watchdog organizations, you set yourself up in a situation where there's not going to be a lot of folks who have the ability to challenge you. And we just wanted to highlight that today, because these are the kind of stories that don't always float up to the front page. But these are the kind of slow burning stories that can have severe impacts on society.
Yeah, and I also think just in the context of all this attention, we mentioned the conspiracy theories, but there's a lot of anti-vax stuff going on about Bill Gates. Look at what Bill Gates is putting his money. I think.
I think that's a good point.
If you really want to follow this stuff closely.